It's MTV's 120 Minutes. I'm Thurston Moore of Chronic Youth, your guest host tonight. And now with music from his soon-to-be-released debut album, Mellow Gold, here's Beck performing a song.
Right on.
Beck honestly might be one of the most underrated artists I've ever really had the pleasure of listening to. I mean, the man is insane. He plays pretty much all the instruments on all of his studio albums, even his early ones, and he's probably one of the more talented musicians I've seen from the 90s. Now, most people starting out listening to Beck would probably start with something along the lines of Odelay. But being a newer Beck fan and going into his discography, Mellow Gold actually stood out the most to me out of all his albums. And not just because it has his biggest hit on it, Loser. The album cover looked really cool, the track listing and the song titles were really interesting, and overall I just thought it would be a really cool listen. A lot of people don't know that this is actually Beck's third studio album instead of his first. While it is his debut album on a major label, he did have two albums before this, one called Golden Feelings, released in 1993, and the other one called Stereopathic Soul Manure, released in 1994. These albums were a lot longer than Mellow Gold, and the quality wasn't up to par, but then again, these albums were self-released, so they're not going to be up to par to a studio recording. Even after Mellow Gold, though, Beck didn't stray far from doing independent releases, as in the same year he released the independent album One Foot in the Grave, which kinda had a similar feel to Mellow Gold, but it did have a lot of different elements that made it its own unique album. Loser being the lead-off single from Mellow Gold is actually probably one of the more misleading lead single choices I've ever seen. The song is more anti-pop and hip-hop oriented, while the rest of the album is more anti-folk, lo-fi, and alternative rock. Beck is going to say that this song is an anomaly in his music, and it's not really anything that would define his career or any album that he's put out. Although I do think it works being the first song off the album. It's a really exciting song, a really catchy song, a really fun song to memorize, and I think that it definitely leads you into the album with a really exciting start. And after that we get into the folk stuff, and there actually is a lot of really good songs with that folk style. Right after Loser we get the song Pano and Snoozer, which one thing I really like about Beck is that his lyrics are really interesting, very weird, and then most of the time they don't really mean much. The lyricism and the imagery really is what makes them stand out. And Pano and Snoozer is actually a really good example of that, with having lyrics such as like a giant dildo crushing the sun. Not really something a serious artist would put in their songs, but Beck is just one of those artists that can just create a really weird imagery and make it a really standout song. And Pain on Mine's one of my favorite on the album, along with Fucking With My Head, Mountain Dew Rock. Honestly, Mountain Dew Rock might be one of my favorites, if not my favorite on the album. It's really the first song on the album, other than Loser, that has kind of a more full feel. And obviously looking through the track list, a song called Mountain Dew Rock just kind of stands out. And speaking of interesting titles, we have the song Motherfucker that comes at the end of the album. And I wouldn't say this is one of my favorites on the album. It's kind of more towards the filler side, although I would say it is really good and really funny. Beck's vocals are really distorted in the song. There's a lot of really heavier guitars, which is weird coming off of a more folky album. And overall, I just think it's a really fun song. One thing I will say about this album is that it is very fun and it doesn't really take itself too seriously. And honestly, I think that's a good thing in any kind of music. I love serious music, but I love when artists can take the time to really make some more lightful music, and I think that Beck did a good job of doing that on this album. A good example of a more lighthearted and funny song would be Truck Driving Neighbors Downstairs, Yellow Sweat. The song opens up with an actual audio recording of Beck's neighbors having a full-on fight, and it's actually really funny. And the whole song has this really lo-fi feel. It's not really recorded very well. The verses have this really weird single-note progression that actually sounds really weird and makes the song sound even more demented. Another word I would use to describe this album, aside from being fun and folky, I would say is demented. Songs like Soul Suckin' Jerk and especially Sweet Sunshine have this really distorted vocal line that is actually really interesting. I think Beck took a really big leap of faith when recording this album and releasing it on a major label, because there are a lot of really interesting sounds and a lot of really creative ideas that the mainstream I don't really think would pick up on as easily. Surprisingly though, this album actually did really good and actually sold 1.3 million copies in the United States. Beer Can is probably the most fun song on the album. It's definitely the most catchy. The chorus has that really nice melody going on, and it's probably the song that I come back to the most on this album. Steal My Body Home is a really Beatles-esque kind of song. It kind of reminds me of Within You Without You from Sgt. Pepper. It's one of the longer songs on the album, and most of the song is this really trippy, psychedelic LSD kind of vibe. But near the end, it kind of has this less professional vibe. The song gets more normal, and it's really one of the more vibey songs on the album, along with the ending song, Black Hole. Black Hole was actually a really beautiful song. It's got this really nice ambience to it, and I think Beck does a really good job delivering the vocals, not making it one of those more goofy songs. I think that this album is actually really cool having a really more serious song end it, instead of having a more goofy one. The secret track Analog Odyssey is pure garbage, but it doesn't really count in my rating for this album. But it is there, and it's kind of a little nice joke song at the end to kind of, you know, just be there, I guess. The only two songs I haven't mentioned yet are Whiskey Clone Hotel City 1997 and Nightmare Hippie Girl. Whiskey Clone isn't one of my favorites on this album, but I do really like it. I think the lyrics are really cool. And Nightmare Hippie Girl is one of my all-time favorites on this album. It's a straightforward love song. The guitar is actually strummed pretty hardly on this song. Doesn't sound the greatest, but it's more of a lo-fi sound, which I really like. And yeah, overall, this gets a high recommendation out of me. If you haven't really checked out Beck before and have only really heard the hit songs like Loser, I definitely suggest checking out this full album. This album is definitely not for everybody. It does take a lot of time to get used to it, but the more you get into it and the more you listen to it, the more I think you grow to love it. That's definitely what happened to me. I actually love this album so much that it actually grew a place on my top 10 favorite albums of all time, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. From the really unique cover art to the really nice ideas and interesting concepts on this album, there's no reason why this shouldn't be in my top 10, especially with the other music that I listen to. Overall, I'm going to give Beck's Mellow Gold an 8.5 out of 10. And like I said earlier, it's not for everyone, but I do say that if you're more of an open-minded music listener and do like some really interesting and weird concepts in their music, I think you'll really like this album. And yeah, overall, that's going to be the end of this video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, do all that stuff if you really enjoyed it. It's been a while since I've made a video, so it's really cool to, you know, do stuff like this. And yeah, keep rocking on, I guess. I don't know.
First ever TV appearance, I understand. Your first ever TV appearance, I understand. Okay, could you hold that for a sec?
Sure.
What Beck is about to do now is take our musical challenge where we test the musical credibility of our guest acts by giving them a schlock song to try and master. And Beck being 24, we've given him a choice of songs from the 80s. In here are some of the worst songs from the 80s. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay, good luck. Good luck, you're sure now. Here we go. I feel just like Bert Newton, but I can never get him. Oh, God. Oh, I remember this clip. It was bloody awful. Who remembers Pat Benatar and Hit Me With Your Best Shot? Are you willing to take the musical challenge, Beck?
Fuck yeah.
At the end of the show, this man, Beck, will sing Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Stay tuned. Good luck.